This is Marketing Uncomplicated. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I have Rebecca Shaddix, and I want to introduce you as she is a seasoned marketer, an executive, and a go-to marketing strategist with a proven track record of driving significant revenue growth across various industries. I love having fellow marketers on the show because we get to banter about the things that are coming up, the different types of ways that businesses can be supporting themselves, how they can work with marketers. So we're going to dive into a bunch of cool things. With a unique background that combines deep technical expertise, data-driven marketing, and empathetic leadership. I love this. I want to touch a bit on that as well. Rebecca has led high growth companies in education, healthcare, and SaaS. So for everybody on the call, SaaS is SaaS, Systems as a Service.
Software as a service.
Impressive success. Yeah, software as a service, sorry. Her approach is rooted in research background, allowing her to blend analytical thinking with creative marketing strategies. As a Forbes contributor and a recognized thought leader, Rebecca brings insight into the societal impacts of technology, particularly in areas such as AI, role in solving global issues, and fostering diversity in tech. Her ability to align technology-driven solutions with broader missions while driving sustainable business results sets her apart in a marketing and leadership landscape. Welcome to the show, Rebecca. It is so good to have you.
Great to be here.
So let's dive in. I want to talk to you about a multitude of subjects. And, as I had mentioned, I think your credibility and the background and a wealth of landscape of marketing is going to lead us into an awesome conversation here. So let's talk a little bit about you and your current role and what you are working on.
Let's do it. So I currently lead product, customer, and lifecycle marketing at a healthcare startup called Garner Health. We have a revolutionary approach to ranking the best doctors based on real patient outcomes. And because these are the doctors who make more accurate diagnoses and have better patient outcomes, it actually costs less to be treated by them. So we pass the cost savings back on to employees. So you get a really great app that tells you who the best doctors are in your area and covers the cost of seeing them. So 75% of the people who use Garner Health pay $0 in medical expenses each year because we cover their deductible right up front. And in my role leading, product, customer, lifecycle marketing is a lot of fun.
Exactly.
But you hit on empathetic leadership. So should we start there and what that means?
Yes, let's dive into that, please.
Current role,
yes.
Great. So I'll blend this empathetic leadership approach with the data-driven approach, which you hit on both. So I think that there's a pretty exciting opportunity for leaders to really balance setting very high expectations, building good habits early on, with also letting the team make their own mistakes and not nitpicking. So I think of my role really as just bringing out the best in my team. They're experts at what they do. We collaborate cross-functionally, so it's clear what expectations and excellence looks like. But then I let tiny little mistakes or quirks or preferences I have go. I think one of the biggest risks with high expectations in marketing is that it can be subjective, but because we have data, we can let the team test things maybe differently than I would have done, build the confidence that I don't make changes to everything they see, and then let the data speak for itself. So this means not nitpicking style. If I would change a word or an image, let's see what happens. Let's run it. Let's test it. Then they know that they can move quickly and iterate, and then I may be surprised. So I think that this is a great opportunity for marketers now to not let preference and opinion cloud out their team's leadership and growth, because we can let small experiments run. They're not going to damage the brand, and then the team builds confidence that their manager isn't changing everything so they can move more quickly.
Yeah, I love that, because just coming from a background also of marketing, but having a leader drive what a certain image or what copy should look like doesn't also necessarily bring the results that you're looking for. So it's exactly. And so, diving into a little bit of the data and understanding that and knowing that that's the moves that you need to be making with the results that you're seeing. The leader is not the audience. Granted, you guys are tapping into the headspace of the audience, and you can be an audience in some sense, but I think relying on what the data says and what comes back versus, the finger in the air, where's the wind blowing? I want to test this photo. That's great. But a multitude of tests and testing and learning, I want to dive into that a little bit, because finding that product market fit in the sense of the combination of imagery and content can frustrate a lot of business owners.
It definitely can. And it's not a one-time check mark. You've hit product market fit or not. you have to refine that roadmap consistently. And so when we think about the habits that that builds in a team, if they have the confidence that they can deploy things quickly, test very different ideas, even ones that I may not have liked the sound of, we move more quickly and we hit more on that product market fit more quickly because we're incorporating the ideas that matter, which are the audience. And the
Yeah.
alternative is a team that's kind of creatively stilted, that they think that they have to guess sort of what their manager wants to get approval. And we never know if there's something that could have been better. So I think that we have this awesome opportunity as marketers that we didn't have 50 years ago. When we didn't have all of the analytics and attribution that we do now, it was a lot of opinion because there was no counterfactual. You ran an ad, it performed in a way you couldn't really track. So we were kind of arts and craftsy until now we have all this data. We can run really small tests, totally different directions, and just let ourselves be surprised and learn.
Yeah, no, I mean, even I would say about 12 or 10 to 12 years ago, I was working for an enterprise company, and this was on the beginning of a lot of like new startups that were coming out in terms of technology to really support the growth of digital marketing. And they had years and years and years and years in back of data. So they came in, we hooked them up to our system, we ran ads with them that looked terrible, but they won over our own creative, right? And so that didn't vote very well with our creative department. So let's talk a little bit about that in terms of, setting up the right creative, not being too precious about the way things look, because for some reason, sometimes the color green or the color orange could be resonating with a whole group of people, and it's just something that we don't necessarily know why, but if it's working, it's working.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Whose opinion counts is essentially what you're hitting at. I think it's really important. We may think green looks bad. That's us. The audience may not. The audience may find too polished of an aesthetic to be less credible, less personable, less authentic. But we may think less polished doesn't look professional or reflect well on our brand. So I think really being flexible initially about testing the assumptions that we have to appear a certain way, our brand personality is a certain way, and how that comes out is the amazing power of the tools at our disposal right now. With the same audience, we can test all these different variations and see what happens.
Yeah. From because you always haven't been in the healthcare industry, what tactics are you taking from all your experiences that you're bringing in across the board that are learnings that can be utilized? Because the healthcare industry, I mean, let's be honest, there's a couple of industries like the healthcare industry, the fashion industry, that are hard to penetrate if you don't have a certain background as a marketer in there, or within that particular industry. And for me, the way I look at marketing, it's not, I wouldn't, to say it's templatized is kind of degrading what marketing actually is and can do for your business. But in actuality, the channels are the same, the approach is very different. So the one key thing that stands out is your target audience and tapping into their mindset. So I'd love to hear a little bit and to really kind of tackle that thought process, because I think a lot of people get a little nervous when they're looking for marketers, or they're looking, to have somebody come in and really market their product. And if they don't have experience in it, what does that mean? So let's talk a little bit about, how these different approaches can really be translatable from industry to industry.
Great question. So I think there's an important through line in just making decisions. Industry experience can be fantastic and really helpful. And so in industries I've worked with in the past, it definitely is a shorter learning curve to understand the players, the competitors, the mindset of their personas. But we want to figure out how to stand out, and the name of that game is differentiation. So I sometimes think that experience in an industry could be as much of a crutch as it is an asset if it means people tend to copy and paste what's already happened before. So if we're not looking at really standing out, thinking critically about what resonates with this audience, what does well, copying and pasting what competitors are doing, or not being intentional enough about where we are actually differentiated is just as likely to yield cookie cutter mediocre results. And I think that the
Mhm.
biggest risk in marketing in general, and in some business decisions more broadly, is mediocrity. We will never have a clear counterfactual of what would have happened if we just kind of persist in this mediocre state of launching a product, for example, without effective market research or market strategy. So the risk of being mediocre, standing like everybody, sounding like everybody else, making claims that everybody else has made, because ultimately we either help people make money or save money if we really get to the root of things. So really being intentional
Yeah.
about what skills you need to grow is what I'd recommend any business owner do. And that could mean borrowing from people or industries who do it really well in totally different verticals. If you're looking for an expert in something, figure out who's doing that really well. Borrowing from outside the industry is much more likely to be differentiated, creative, really pushing boundaries than just repeating a given framework.
Yeah, I love that you say that, borrowing from other industries, because you don't want to just be doing what, your company within the healthcare space is doing. You want to tap in and get creative and think outside the box. Like, heck, it could even be like a beverage company that's doing something really cool, that you
Absolutely.
could really take and twist and translate it into, like, how could that work for us to tap into the mindset of like our target audience, something similar, but it's like you're creatively like stretching the idea to really kind of, get into the mindset, because at the end of the day, we're all a little bit of audiences for everything, right?
Absolutely. And the important part about that is if you're borrowing from the beverage industry in healthcare or B2B SaaS more broadly, you're clear about what isn't going to copy and paste or resonate with your audience. It could be a cool consumer activation. If you're borrowing from the same industry, there's more of a risk of not really differentiating and not cutting through the noise because it is sometimes harder to see what about it wouldn't apply or where you could stand out. So I think you're exactly right. And borrowing across them tends to be just more creative. And that's something we do in our weekly team meetings at Gartner. We call it Marketing I Love. Every week, a different team member just presents a campaign or a concept or marketing they love. Could be event marketing, could be social, could be anything. And it is rarely from our own industry, occasionally. But it just gives us these creative ideas. And one of the questions I most often ask is what should change for us at Gartner? What should we adapt to be relevant to our
Mm-hmm.
team? Because it's really easy
Mm-hmm.
to say, isn't it great? They used user generated content to yield something. But then we can very clearly say what has to adapt for our audience. You can still do that borrowing from your same industry, but you have to be more intentional.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, I love that you're doing that. I used to do that a lot, and even I do that a lot still with, supporting clients. And one advertising piece that stands out to me is a Volvo commercial that was done during a
Mhm.
Super Bowl. I forget which one, but it was where they tapped into to audience, activation, and they basically asked every audience to tweet Volvo every time they saw another Cars commercial. So they
Mhm.
didn't spend any money at the Super Bowl, but they had pushed all of this out on social media while every other car company was spending millions of dollars. They were getting more space and getting more talk across all social channels, and they ended up boosting their sales by a crazy amount, like post Super Bowl. So that's something, to your point, that you can take and you can utilize in any industry. It's just, how are you stretching the concept and the idea?
Yeah, and the willingness to take risks, I think, is something that has not necessarily become better with more data-driven marketing because it's so easy to attribute mediocre results or poor results from a campaign directly to the person who came up with it. And if you're going to try something totally novel and innovative, it could totally fail. It takes a pretty sophisticated leadership team to look at the marketer and say, you have our blessing to take some risks. And that means they could
Sure.
fail because most people say, sure, take risks, but they're not willing to deal with the downside. And so marketers get incentivized to just kind of incrementally improve things that have happened because if something can't totally fail, it can't totally succeed either because there could always be something left on the table. So I think that's the
Yeah.
downside of just general accountability in marketing is if you're not willing to let it fail, you're just kind of looking for a good idea with a high chance of succeeding. If you're actually taking risks,
Yeah.
it could fail.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and even with the failure, you can pull out some interesting data from it as well. So
Hmm.
it's a learning experience at the end of the day. I
Absolutely.
do want to tap into your thought process in and around, what is going on with the whole sort of AI and technology direction, right? So, I mean, you've been in marketing for X amount of years. You've seen how AI has kind of grown. I mean, we've been utilizing it and in small increments as marketers 10, 12, 13, 14 years ago, right? But now that it has blown up and it's reaching audiences like small business owners where they have the ability, and they're really targeting small business owners to tap into these kind of systems and these tools, but I think the frustration can start to rise with not being able to understand how to utilize them, not being able to set themselves up with success with them, which is kind of giving marketing a direction of not such positivity. So let's talk a little bit about how AI is growing, the things to look for and the things to kind of avoid as you're kind of looking to implement these tools and these systems into your business for growth.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right in just hitting on these are tools and systems. And like any tool and system, you have to learn how to use it. I think the deceptive power of AI is that it's a really low floor. You can just pull up ChatGPT, ask it a question, and then judge the results. With another
Yeah.
tool, like if you want to implement HubSpot or Google Analytics, you would actually train yourself to do it. There's prompt generation training that you can learn and actually invest a few hours, 5 hours on the internet, how to really refine the prompts that you're asking, the use cases that you're thinking of AI being a good thought partner for, and just refining how you use it. Just showing up, plugging in a question, and expecting to walk away with a brilliant campaign is like nothing we'd expect from any other tool. So that's where I see a lot of the mediocre disappointment come from. Asking rewrite X and being disappointed it doesn't sound better. Of course not. There was not enough specificity. You didn't train the algorithm on what good looks like. You didn't give them a role. You didn't give them a very specific audience and output. So sure, showing up and just dumping something in, expecting it to be better than your internal team could create isn't the role of AI. Refining and honing the skills and accelerating the research and augmenting your team as a brainstorm partner, you have to learn how to use AI for.
I like that you mentioned that because as you were talking, it was almost like I was thinking about how when you hire salespeople, they're only as good as how good you train them. And it's the same thing with AI and the systems and the
Absolutely.
tools and the prompts that you're saying, right? So it's like it's the same with humans. I mean, if you bring a salesperson on, even if they've been doing sales for years, but if you don't train them into your product and service, what are your, unique value propositions? What is your
And those have to be the
differentiation
right ones,
factor?
right? You could give them
Exactly. And
bad differentiation points and then
for
it doesn't
sure,
matter. Yeah.
for sure. Exactly. And it's the same with prompts and using AI. But it goes into the process because I'm sure even, as a team, you guys have the expertise and you have the skill sets that you bring in house, but then you also utilize, companies outside to like further help support your
Mhm.
growth and so on. Right. So I think, there is a lesson here with how well you also onboard external, marketing agencies and support, even if you have like a consultant to be able to get them to complete the end result and to get to the goal that you're looking for. And I think that that's a message that's very important because we need to be setting up marketers for success, whether in-house or out-house. So
It's so
let's talk a
true,
little
right?
bit about
Yeah,
that.
I couldn't agree more. Your outputs of anything can only be as good as your inputs. That's true of onboarding people. That's true of any AI platform. The outputs are only as good as the inputs. So, what that means is if you're not giving the team either really clear direction on the goal and scope to do their own research, or a pretty well researched messaging framework, then there's just really not a lot of results you can expect or it'll take a lot longer and you need to be a lot more patient. Because otherwise, how
Yep.
is somebody plugging into your system supposed to know what resonates? It'll take time for them to develop that insight, or you need to give them really well defined parameters.
Yeah. Excellent. I mean, it's just it's very frustrating because I think specifically also for, the smaller tech startups and the small businesses, like their threshold of peak of frustration can happen a lot faster than an enterprise company because budget is also a little bit on the constrained side, right? And so I think, ensuring that they know how to bring somebody on, and like to your point when you were talking about, look for that person who has that skill set and that, that of what you want to accomplish and achieve, and bring them in to do that versus
Mhm.
just kind of sitting back, and realizing what you need. And I think it also really goes back to like what we talked about, empathetic leadership. It's because you also have to hire folks
Yeah,
to come in and
absolutely.
support your ideation, your growth goals, and everything of that matter. So it's really it's knowing thyself in a way
Yeah.
before you go
And
out and you
scoping
make
it
that
well.
hire, right?
Yeah, making that, I couldn't agree more. Hires, contractors, AI, you have to scope the ask well. If you don't know what
Yes.
success looks like in a very refined, narrow set of skills, then no one will ever achieve them. You could be hiring
Yep.
the most brilliant SDR, but you actually need a product marketer, for example. That's probably too broad. You could be hiring the most brilliant go-to-market strategist in product marketing, for example, but you really need someone who excels in sales enablement and collateral. A laundry list of going into ChatGPT, asking for a job description and uploading it is going to be a disaster for whoever you hire. Refine what success looks like, clearly scope 30, 60, 90-day goals, and then what success will look like 6 to 12 months later. Otherwise, how can you vet someone's skills? You could be bringing in a brilliant marketer who doesn't align with exactly what you need, or overloading them as the sole go-to-market strategist, sales enablement, collateral generator, messenger, market researcher. And no one can excel with all of those things at once.
Yep.
You have to
Yep.
scope it,
Yep.
scope the ask for AI, scope the ask of people, and then make sure you're really onboarding effectively, to your point.
Yeah.
Same for
Yeah.
all of them.
No, I completely agree. Yeah. I want to actually dive in a little bit more and take a little bit of a step back, because let's say you jump into a tech startup or a health tech or whatever it is, ed tech. Just any kind of startup where, you're actually having to come in and kind of build that. So if somebody who is a founder that's listening to this, what do they need to be looking for, to be hiring somebody like you to grow out that growth team? And what is the process that they need to be thinking about? Because a lot of the times they may go out and say, I need to hire a chief marketing officer, but are they really at the level and the stage to hire somebody and be putting out a 250,000 plus salary? Or should they be thinking about hiring somebody at a director level role, and so on and so forth? Now, this obviously boils down to their goals and what you were talking about, and what they want to achieve. But from a high level of a 5,000 foot view that could support any industry that is really starting out, what are the things that they really need to be looking for?
Great question. I'll give you a framework and then very specific tactical advice
Yes.
first. So I think you have to be intentional about what you're actually trying to solve. What is the business level goal or question that you need to achieve? Not generate revenue. There's really a problem that is preventing you from hitting your revenue goal. Identify that. And then, almost without exception, the first marketing hire, the first 5 marketing hires probably, should not be a terminal, so a C-level title, because you're still really exploring what's working. So cranking out different things almost always for small businesses makes more sense to have with somebody tactically who can run operations and deploy the campaigns, which some CMOs can do. Those tend to be really, really expensive. But you need someone who can tactically execute very quickly and test things because you're still exploring what works. Once you've understood and refined a little bit more, this is product market fit, we have it, this is our target audience, we have it, then it would make sense to hire this terminal title who can exploit that advantage by really going deep on messaging and positioning or refining elements of the brand that will become a differentiation. But I typically would say if you're if you're a really early stage startup, you need someone who's going to be really tactical and execute these campaigns very quickly, who isn't as expensive, because you could pivot and find that the most important skill in this senior title is one that isn't top of mind when you first hire somebody as your first head of marketing. So the first marketing hire should usually be tactically excellent in a channel that you yourself have seen work. So it could be social. You know that works for your audience. Great. Bring in somebody who excels there. A CMO probably is not tactical enough to be there. Plus, it gives people then the opportunity to grow with the company into that title. If you hire somebody who may have been a director or VP at a larger stage company, they can grow with the company or have a more seasoned CMO put on top of them if they're excellent. It's pretty hard to then say 3 years down the line, we have this really awesome director who's just not ready to be a CMO to take our company to the next level. What do you do with them? You don't want to have to fire them if you gave them an inflated title, but you can't
Yeah.
stick somebody on top of them. It's harder than letting somebody excellent grow with that title. So typically I'd say
Yeah.
tactical first with a channel that you as the business owner know has worked because you've done it, you've tested it, and then be intentional about scoping those next hires. Otherwise,
Yeah.
contractors and agencies really have the great expertise to flex.
I like that. And I'm wondering then, like, even if they don't know, like, who to hire from a tactical standpoint, would you suggest that they go out and work with an agency or work with a contractor, let's say, to help me build the strategy of exactly what I need and utilize them for like 2, 3, maybe 4 months, so that you're not, to your point, having to bring somebody on, at a certain level and then, oh gosh, we don't need them and we're spending a lot of money, because startups are volatile, right? And you don't want to pull somebody out of a job and then have to put them back into the job market. So, maybe in that sense, it's going somewhere to find and really build that strategy to then know who to even hire. Because I feel like a lot of these companies, even when they're getting investments from VCs, it's almost like, here's $3 million, best of luck. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would go back to it has to be scoped really well. I don't think
Yeah.
anyone can come up with a real comprehensive strategy in 4 months. I think that people
Yeah.
who excel in go-to-market strategy or brand strategy can do something very specific, scoped very intentionally with very intentional
Yep.
inputs in that time. Otherwise, I might just expand the time frame. A marketing ops, brand, go-to-market strategy, marketing strategy agency, you can work with them for years without taking on
Yep.
the risk, the headcount, the benefits, etc., that comes with it to intentionally answer questions and scope the next phase. It could be testing some market segmentation. That's a very specific question with a very specific scope that could totally be achieved in 3 or 4 months. What should our marketing
Yep.
strategy be for the next few years? No one is going to know at that early stage. You have to keep testing and refining
Sure.
what's resonating.
Sure. Yeah, which goes back to our earlier conversation of, not getting frustrated in the sense of really finding that, that click and what's making it click in the market, and
Mhm.
what's working with your audience can really kind of lead you off rail if you get frustrated, because it can take time and it can take, a while to kind of get that connection with your market, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's a moving target. You could find product market fit and lose it, or not truly understand if you're not doing enough of that customer and market research, which aren't the same, that they're overlap, but market research
Yeah.
is more broad. Your customers are not your prospects. So if you don't really understand and how to replicate why people are buying from you, and then how that market is shifting as you expand beyond early adopters who may not look like later stage adopters, that's moving and that's a moving target. And so there has to just be constant refinement and iteration and understanding of why. That's where the qualitative
Hmm.
insights go with these quantitative data. There's no dashboard in the world that could tell you why something happened. You launch a campaign or look at web traffic over time. You don't know how to replicate that without the qualitative
Yeah.
insights and lots of interviews of why people chose you, how they found you. You can track their
Yep.
journey all you want digitally, but until you actually talk to them, the exact same touch points could have completely different intents, completely different lifetime values if you don't understand the psychographics of that buyer.
Yeah. Let's actually dive into that a little bit, because I think a lot of companies fail because they don't dive into the psychographics of their buyer and listen to what their audience wants and needs across the board. And at the end of the day, it's like, why are you even in business if you're not doing that, right? So, I mean, let's really talk about the importance of like keeping your ear to the ground and really focusing on, what's really driving your audience to choose you over your competitor and why.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Let's dive into that. Why somebody bought from you over a competitor can only be answered by a current customer. How you can appeal to somebody who knows nothing about you, prospects can answer. And where I think people fall apart with this research is asking the wrong types of questions to the wrong types of people. So there is product research that is great that you would ask current users who could be end users in a B2B state and not the buyer. You would ask them more direct questions about this is a new product that we're thinking of launching. Show me how you would use it, etc. That is product research that's not going to tell you new market opportunities because it's very specific to what you're putting currently in front of people. If you're trying to really understand and scope the problem that you uniquely can solve, saying as little about the solution you have in mind or the category you're in as possible is going to yield better insights. And so if you actually
Mhm.
really want to understand why someone bought from you, asking the most open-ended but specific questions about what it was that drove a purchase behavior, how they could replicate it, why they chose you over someone else? These are all questions that have a certain time and place that you don't want to just throw in with, hi prospect who's never heard of me before. This is what we do. Here's what we build. Do you like it? How much would you pay for it? That's a completely inappropriate line of questioning for that type of buyer. And so being really intentional about who you're talking to and the insights you want from them is going to be what yields the right kind of results. Because otherwise, people try to be helpful, but they're going to filter their answers through the lens of what they think you want to hear based on what they know about your company. So if you're trying to ask a prospect something really open-ended to understand new market opportunities or why they're engaging with competitors in a certain way, the less you say about your solution, the better, until the very end, at which point you can say, here's what we have in mind, here's what I heard from you. If you invert that and you put your product in front of them first, everything is filtered through the lens of what they think you want to hear. So go more open-ended and get more specific at the end.
Yeah, no, I mean, lots of companies I think fail to do this, and to really gather that insight, which is troublesome at the end of the
And it's
day.
worse than not doing it at all, I think, because when we make assumptions that we know have no data, we are aware they're assumptions and we're open-minded about testing them. When we have the wrong data that we're super confident in because of the wrong methodology, that could be qualitative, it could be quantitative, we could be just like making decisions that are not rooted in anything, that we don't even test as intentionally because we think the data supports them. And that's what I think the biggest mistakes with trying to make a data-driven decision is assuming that any dashboard can make a decision. It's an input to then fill in with qualitative context. Otherwise, you and I can look at the exact same dashboard and draw 5 different results of why, because we
True,
don't
very
know.
true. Yeah, very true. And I like that point. And I want to expand on that because it's, there again, there's a lot of companies that are coming out where it can feed all of this different data in, it can spit something out for you. For those especially that don't necessarily know how to dig into the data and read it, I think that can be a little bit scary because again, it goes back to the concept of marketing doesn't work. It's not helping me. It's not helping my business. Well, I think at a high level, it's really, understanding how to extract out of the data. And to your point, like you may see something that is completely different to you, but then you need to dig in a little further. And it's not just looking at a dashboard and saying, okay, I'm getting X amount of traffic from X ad, so on and so forth. But
So let's
is
double down
the ad
and spend more money on
exactly?
ads, right? Yeah. Versus looking at the
Exactly.
creative and
Yeah.
messaging. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because then they do that, and then there's no ROI, and then it's marketing's fault, or it's like digital doesn't work for me, and so on. I mean, what a lot of people fail to realize is that marketing at the end of the day is very intricate, and I don't want to say it's complex, but in some cases it can, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it can't work. I think that for anyone working in yours and my position at companies, and working with founders or head of companies, need to really educate them in the sense of some things are going to take longer than others. We may find something that completely like works and clicks versus another product or service may not necessarily work or click, right? So I
Right.
think
And
it's
then the
that level
refinement.
of
Oh, sorry,
hmm
Sasha. I think I've
no,
delayed
please go
in my
ahead.
time.
I love this.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
couldn't agree more. I think the refinement of that, trying one thing once and concluding it does or doesn't work, completely misses the execution. So running a series of ads, for example, and concluding they're either the best thing in the world for your company or they don't work at all, you can never do from a single example. And so I think of this as a reverse blueprint. So you would set a blueprint, meaning you have a strategy, which is a clear set of hypotheses that you're clearly testing with certain variables. You're testing that this message and this creative for this audience is resonating, testing that. So you set your strategy in advance, aligned to the business goals, and then you set the tactics of how it is you'll execute. But you evaluate in exactly the opposite order. You look at the tactics then. Did this creative, this messaging, this targeting, this timing connect with this audience in this way? Then go backwards to this channel, this strategy overall. But you need lots of those tactics to make that conclusion. I An analogy I use a lot with my team is you think of it as a blueprint. You would never start building a house without a blueprint. You wouldn't just huck some bricks here and say, this is the fireplace. You would know where the fireplace fits into the broader strategy. But then you'd also never make a conclusion like electricity is just not going to work with the structure based on trying it once, having the wiring be faulty. That's the exact same thing. you would never make that sweeping of a conclusion. But early on, when electricity was introduced, a lot of people did say that. They said it's too dangerous because it catches on fire. We can't do it. Rather than let's refine the tactics. Same exact thing. Figure out the tactics, evaluate them, measure them, then evaluate the strategy, but set the strategy first before the tactics. Otherwise, you're never actually testing anything.
Love that analogy. That's really incredible. That and it makes so much sense, to anybody, even if they're not a marketer. I couldn't agree more. Now that we are really diving into sort of the process and everything of like hiring, how to set up strategies, how to go to market, the different types of testing. Maintaining clarity and focus when you're managing a multitude of marketing strategies, because at the end of the day, let's face it, right? I mean, some companies are going to say, I'm just going to go out and test, digital ads, right? But at the same time, they're also running organic, posts and so on and so forth. So you aren't just going to be running and maintaining one kind of channel and lane within marketing, but the clarity is extremely important, because I think a lot of it gets lost, and the watering down of a brand really happens way too much across the board. So let's talk a little bit about, really maintaining that as you're starting to grow and build more channels, with your marketing strategies.
Yeah, explore then exploit. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm getting over
Yeah.
being sick. Is the saying that comes to mind. But explore a really small number first, do it really well, and then exploit that from there. So, what I mean by that is test two or three, fewer, better. Really dive into how email and social and event marketing work for your team with really clear metrics that ladder to it a story very intentionally. Test a few, do them really well, understand why or why they're not working, and then build it on. But the idea that you would have to have a really robust webinar content strategy beyond just feeding an email engine, for example, is where I think a lot of brands dilute their impact and lose track of what's working. So when I think about setting the goals, I think, what are the top level business objectives? How do we very clearly waterfall those down to departmental objectives and then individual objectives, and make sure we're telling that story clearly back the other direction? So testing each channel enough requires the attention and the diligence and the iteration to really know why something is changing or is or isn't working. Once you've mastered that, or concluded that it's not the right channel for any number of reasons, but you've really executed enough to know that, then expanding into other channels makes sense. Trying to go everywhere, build a presence on every social platform while you're building out a newsletter strategy and email marketing and content marketing across video, etc. That's where things get really diluted. Figure out a few better, execute them well, and then expand and use them to feed across each other.
Yeah, I mean, because what a lot of people tend to do is just, and I've seen this, having worked internally with enterprise companies and then going into the startup world, um, we grow too fast too soon, and then all of a sudden you have 20 different social channels and handles based on every product or service that you've ever put out there, and then you're having to kind of scale back. Or you could also have a newsletter for every product and service, and people are signing up to these, so you have one individual that is receiving 20 different newsletters on a monthly basis, right? I mean, so and then the messaging is either diluted, it's watered down, like you're not talking about the main frame of, the main umbrella company versus all these little products and services. And then, you're having to scale back, which can kind of complicate the whole strategy and output as well. I can't hear you. I don't know what happened. I think you
Oh,
might have
sorry, my
muted.
external mic. I was
That's
thinking,
okay.
complexity kills early stage startups. If there's too much complexity in managing too many product lines that are subtly different with very different audiences, it's too much to maintain and do any of it well.
Yeah. How do you think the landscape of the really it is a bombardment of all these like new tech platforms that are coming out, to support marketing? How do you think that they are creating, like really hurt, not necessarily hurting, but really, because I mean, at the end of the day, like what I like to do as a marketer is like focus on the basics, right? And focus on like knowing what works and what doesn't work. And I think, if somebody isn't a marketer and somebody is a founder and trying to navigate this landscape with the over amount of new tech and new tools that are coming out into the market, how do you think it's either helping or hurting the marketing industry, whether it is data, whether it is, the different types of new email tools are coming out, the different types of video tools, like, hey, like sign up with us and we can spit out like 20 different video and so on and so forth. How do you think that landscape is really hurting or helping?
I think it goes back to clear scoping, clear goals, clear hypotheses, clear execution. So if there's a new tool designed specifically for your audience, for you, for a specific reason, there's a clear scope to that. You're trying out this new email tool, for example, over MailChimp because there's a very clear reason, very clear hypothesis. But we don't have to reinvent the wheel for everything. And so I think that balance of trying something like Be Real over, that's a bad example, trying something like Instagram threads over Twitter, clear hypothesis because you think your audience is there for a reason. That's a clear hypothesis that you could test more easily. Trying out a tool for marketing automation that isn't HubSpot, for example, if you're a startup, clear hypothesis, clear reason. There's a reason you're doing it, so you can control for that. Just being intentional about where you're putting your bets is important, so you can really align that to an overall strategy.
Yeah. And I like that you bring up HubSpot because, I love HubSpot. I think it's a great tool, but I don't necessarily think it's the best for a small business owner. But you know what? They've cornered the market and they push so much marketing and they push for small business. And then, they end up buying
I
into
love
a platform
HubSpot.
where I'm in agreement, but a lot of the times, like I'm, working with a small business owner who's exponentially paying for something that they're not even using and they don't even need right now. Right.
They
So I
didn't
think to
scope
your
it
point, it's
right.
yes, they didn't scope it right. And it's being intentional because there are platforms, specifically as we talk through email, that are set up to work for your industry at best, like healthcare stuff, right? There is tools that work better for healthcare. There's tools that or email that work better for e-commerce companies and so on and so forth. And look into the details. Don't just settle because you've been marketed to, is what I'm trying to get at.
Totally agree with you. I completely agree. What I see and I hear in that comes up for me is a lot of early stage companies start trying to solve for problems they don't have yet by compromising the best case scenario of where they are now. And where I've seen that happen is, oh, we need Marketo because when we scale, we'll need this customization and the personalization. But then all the complexity that comes with that could prevent you from getting to a place of sustainably being able to support that need. And I see this
Yes.
happen a lot with a lot of different decisions. We're going to compromise the best state, best solution right now because when we scale, we'll want X or Y. Solve the problems in front of you first. Great, think ahead, think long term, don't create a bunch of tech debt, but don't compromise the best case of right now for the sake of eventually we'll want X investment in all of this documentation, for example.
Yes, yes. But and I like that you bring that up also because I think buy into a platform that will help you grow not just for 6 months but will help you grow for a year and a half to 2 years. But Marketo being the engine that it is, like a startup company in early stage is not going to need the type of sophistication that Marketo delivers to you, right?
No, or
But it's
Marquette's going to
finding
find
some
us for it to administer it in the
exactly.
meantime. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I've migrated email systems throughout my entire career and Marketo is one of the most complex. And yeah, I mean it's not everybody needs it. I mean a lot of
No,
people don't need it.
absolutely. A lot of
Yeah.
people don't need it, and a lot of people will have a worse product from using it just because of how complex it is.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. So give me a case study that like through everything that we've talked through in terms of testing and learning and walk us through a little bit about how you guys had a complex problem needing to solve, and it's not necessarily a problem but it's like a complex, okay, here is product X, we need to market it to target Y. How do we build out this process end to end? And what is all of that happens in the middle in terms of testing and learning? And what was the success that came out of that really kind of nailed it for you guys?
Sure. Lots of examples come to mind. I want to think of one that might have the most elements of relevance to your audience. So I think probably unseating established competitors is something startups run into a lot. So the product that comes to mind for me is GoGuardian Teacher, which was an education product that we launched to a completely different end user than our primary buyer as an extension of requests that came out from our primary buyer. The flagship product was sold to an admin persona. This product was being used by teachers bought by the same admin. And there was already an established industry competitor called Hapara. It pretty much had market domination. The question of how would you unseat Hapara? Why would anyone use GoGuardian Teacher over Hapara came up a bunch. And so that started with identifying the need first and foremost from the buyer and validating that there was significant willingness to pay for it. That overlapped with identifying a significant change in the market trend, which was schools now starting to give students devices one-on-one. And then the need for an interface that was clear and easy for teachers to use and gave them the control they needed. Started with that market insight and that clear feature need request from our audience, identified a shift in the market that made it viable, identified a clear opportunity for differentiation, which was an interface that was both more intuitive but also more powerful. And then that was the foundation of leveraging a positioning framework that anchored on those. Clear, great UI that was clean, easy to use with a brand that was personable, then let us expand by understanding what the buyer wanted and what the end user needed. So we could ramp up retention by speaking directly to the needs of the end user, ramp up acquisition by understanding what the buyer was motivated by. And that was the foundation of really significant growth. I can go into more
Yeah.
detail of those campaigns too if
No,
you'd like.
yeah, no, I love that, but I do want to go into detail because I think what we didn't talk about in the piece of building all of this is the focus on retention.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about that because in the news, like Hermes has been getting like a lot of coverage these days just because of the 60 Minutes and kind of like how they do their thing in terms of what does their like product marketing look like in terms of how they keep it so tight to the chest and intimate to a small group of buyers versus like how we're seeing like the Walmart Birkin bag that's coming out, but they really focus and retain their clientele in an excellent manner, and have people that come back and have repeat purchase. And what I think a lot of companies tend to focus on is acquisition, 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 acquisition. And one large enterprise that I worked for, we didn't have a long-term customer life cycle. They were more important about quarterly revenue that was being driven in to the company versus long-term customer life cycle retention, which ended up hurting them long term in the long run, being a subscription based model because you had a lot of promo jumpers, meaning people were just jumping from promotion to promotion, which was also hurting them. But yes, it was bringing a large chunk of revenue into the funnel. So the importance of retention is huge. So
It's
whether
huge.
you attach it to the case study that you just described, or we talk about it overall, I really want to dive into that because it's super important, and it's not just about acquisition and gaining in those numbers, but it's really, even in the beginning, hyper focusing on what that retention looks like for you as a business owner.
Completely. Couldn't agree more. Retention has roughly 4 times more impact on overall business profitability and viability than net new acquisition. So pumping people into, they're more expensive to acquire than it is to retain a current customer. Oftentimes current customers, especially early on, can have higher lifetime value overall if they hit a very specific use case for your audience. So this pumping more people with more money into a leaky funnel is a recipe for disaster because not only do you not always make back what it cost to acquire them, but now these are people who actually think they associate negative value from your brand. So they're harder to acquire again in the future if you want to. So being mindful of the impact of this monetization is so important. I couldn't agree more. And you get what you incent from your team. And so if just more acquire anyone, say anything to sell anything is what you're incentivizing the sales team to do upstream, then the account management customer success teams won't have a really clear representation of if they could have retained those customers down the line. And then the monetization is shot. And so I think that this long-term impact of these short-term promos is really important to identify. You brought up that great example. If people are being trained to wait for discounts because they know they're always coming, then you've impaled your pricing model a little bit in the value that people can expect from you. So being really mindful of how these near-term promos impact long-term lifetime value, long-term retention is really important, because just pumping a quick hack at the end of a quarter to sell more could train people to wait for lower prices and then erode your brand
Yes,
eventually.
yes, yes, yes. And that's another great point. Sales and offerings and how people go crazy towards the end of the year in terms of, oh, we need to, and maybe it is that they're offering it to basically get rid of inventory. A lot of clothing departments do that because I think it's an overbuild of like inventory that they need to push out, right? But it could also water down your brand. I think, clothing companies and department stores are on a completely different cycle, right? So I think that their allotment to have these type of cyclical sales are very different to if you're in a B2B company or if you have a SaaS company. How do you really structurize your sales and how do you really format them so you're not diminishing your product or your service, that people wait for them? So what is your thought process in terms of really markdowns or sales, how you entice people to really kind of move through the purchase flow?
Yeah, my thought is know your audience, know your differentiation, and then be strategic about why and how you're messaging an offer.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
certain retail products, for example, if we'll borrow that, are less valuable to users at certain times of the year. So it would make sense to have winter coats lower cost as we head into summer. That's clear that it's not a lower value of the product overall. It makes sense. So just being really intentional about why your audience is buying from you is so important. And then clear hypotheses of what you're testing and why you're doing it. So you're very intentionally saying, we're clearing out Christmas retail at the first week of January. People are still going to buy Christmas decorations before Christmas because the seasonal nature of that product. That makes perfect sense and wouldn't erode the value over time. If you're haphazardly throwing a promo discount code for a product that doesn't lose value, a set of, not earrings, because that at Valentine's Day that makes sense. But if you're basically just
yeah.
taking every opportunity for every Veterans Day, Halloween sale for a product that doesn't connect to it, you're training people to wait for discounts. And so just
Yeah.
be intentional and mindful about the value your product is offering. And I think this is true of B2B SaaS too. If you're going to be the lowest price solution, you're competing on price, you're impaling a little bit your ability to then leverage more profit margin for R&D back in your product. So if you're competing on price, all it takes is for a product that hasn't, who has had more money to invest in R&D, to lower their prices, to erode the reason to buy you. Be really mindful about the position you've chosen to take, and then how you're testing and validating that it's attracting a sustainable audience. And that means testing, asking why people purchased you, checking lifetime value, making sure that CAC to LTV stays healthy, just being really intentional about how you're doing things. And what I think the biggest risk is just looking around, saying, hey, this worked for them, let's copy it, or reading a book and deciding to copy strategies without being intentional about your audience. That's where people get into this cycle of not knowing their real differentiation and having a hard time maintaining any edge.
Yeah, no, that's informative because I think to your point, a lot of people jump on the Veterans Day, Valentine's Day, so on and so forth, and it gets muddled and it gets lost in the process. And a lot of the times when I am supporting, businesses, I'm like, let's hold off on, the wave of what's happening during the holidays and let's push maybe some kind of promo when it's unexpected. So to your point, you're not training them to, really recognize that they can come to you at this point in time, but you're kind of, stepping outside of that box and you're giving them a different kind of promotion at a different time. And it could be, whether the mindset of it's like, we value our clients, beginning of the year, so on and so forth. However you choose to position it, you are making that differentiation standpoint.
Absolutely. And deciding to compete on price as the low cost competitor in your market is totally a valid strategic decision if you're clear on the trade offs. And so I think that's just it. Be clear on the position you've chosen to take for a reason.
Yeah, totally. So, two-part question for two different audiences. What is your key takeaway for marketers who are listening to this podcast in terms of, what's changing, how to stay on the train and continue. And then for business owners, founders, and entrepreneurs, what is your advice in terms of, what they need to be thinking of and doing, jumping into marketing?
I think for both, the easier a tool like AI seems to be to use, the lower the floor is, the harder it is to get differentiated value out of it. So you should think about it like learning, like any tool. If it's really easy to use something, then everyone can use it really easily. To make differentiated value come out of a tool that's really easy to use means more learning how to customize it and train it to you. That's something I would just take for all of these tools. If you think you can just plug in a question like create an ad campaign for a shoe company, anyone can do that. So the messaging won't be differentiated. If you use it as a real thought partner with really intentional prompts, really intentional inputs, then you're going to get something more valuable out of it. And that's how I think about marketing in general. Anyone can spin up any reel. To actually really do it differentiatedly takes more work and more expertise. And so it's worth putting in the learning.
Yeah. And I like the point that you brought up earlier when I was kind of saying, should a company hire like a fractional CMO or a company to support them with their strategy for X amount of months? I love that you said it doesn't just happen in X amount of months, right? It's cyclical by nature. You're moving through the process. You're also testing and learning. So you're going to have to kind of go back, reevaluate what was originally set up from a strategy and maybe change that strategy moving forward. It's a living, breathing process. It's not a one size fits all. It's not a, set it and forget it. It's not, here is your Bible for a lack of a better term, like these are your rules and your framework to move forward and grow. It's not that process. Yes, there is a framework. There is, the same channels, but it really is going through the notions and understanding that, testing is a big part of the process.
Absolutely.
This has been an amazing conversation, Rebecca. I feel like you and I can continue for another hour. I loved having you on, though, so I appreciate your time.
It's been great
And
to
I
work with
will,
you.
yeah, I will link your LinkedIn below if that's great, if that's good with you,
Perfect.
so that people can follow you. Maybe even ping you with any questions that they may have. But this has been truly informative, and we really appreciate your time.
It's been great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.